It's me. It's Mr. Hallam. I'm back as your teacher starting this week again. So we're going to keep moving. Very similar fashion as you have with Miss Barnes. We'll have notes each week. We'll have a guided reading each week, and then some type of assessment. Feel free to give me feedback. If you like the project, most people turned it in, and those grades should be up today at some point for the work from last chapter. So if that was a good kind of assessment, either the PowerPoint or the writing, let me know. If you didn't like it, you rather have something more traditional, let me know too. But we'll kind of stick with this notes. The little Google form quiz I think is good. I might do a little more quick write type questions, and then we'll go from there. But the main thing is I want to start putting lectures up for these notes. You don't have to listen to this, but you are. So let's talk about foreign conflict, right? So chapter 25, we talk about Ronald Reagan and his kind of philosophy, and George H.W. Bush, his vice president, becomes president. We're going to talk about some of the foreign conflicts that happened throughout this period. So we're actually going to see the Cold War start to come to an end here in the late 1980s. Mikhail Gorbachev becomes the new Russian leader, and he begins two new programs, Glasnost and Perestroika. Glasnost is going to kind of cut down on that freedom of speech, basically allow more freedom of speech for people in the Soviet Union, criticism of the government, a little more free press, and then Perestroika is going to have less government control of the economy, basically move toward a little bit more capitalism. People can earn money. There can be some private ownership of business. It's not complete, but we're moving in that direction. This is kind of the beginning of the end for the Soviet Union. We also start to see a lot of non-Russian republics start to declare their independence. So Romania, Yugoslavia, and start to break away from the Soviet Union. That Iron Curtain is going to be gone here in the late 80s. And, Ronald Reagan, as one of the most famous presidential speeches of the 20th century, goes to Berlin and says, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall, asks him to tear down the Berlin Wall, and that will, in 1987, that will get torn down within 5 years. So, Cold War is coming to an end. We'll come back to this as well. So we actually see the Berlin Wall get torn down, like I said, in 89 into 1990. Germany is freed. They are free to be independent. They're connected. And, it's a really big thing. Basically, what happened was the Soviet Union allowed free passage through the wall. And so all these people showed up on both sides. And basically the guards are like, screw it, I'm out. And people just started taking sledgehammers and taking the wall down. No one stopped them. It's over, right? So you can actually buy pieces of the wall online. So if you can have your own piece of the Berlin Wall for $20 or so. In China, we start to see some protests of communism. Tiananmen Square being the most famous, there's a giant student protest in Tiananmen Square, kind of like a Times Square here in America, where basically these college students challenge the government, to use that iron fist that communist China uses on them, show the world they're just going to slaughter these students. The Chinese government brought in tanks. Students were getting in front of the tanks, challenging them to continue to run them over. It became a worldwide thing of, maybe this communism thing starting to break down a little bit. Now, the military is going to shut it down. China still is communist today, so it showed that. We're going to get involved in other countries. We're going to kind of swing the big stick, and that containment piece that we've talked about in this course for so long, I don't say it's going to go away, but we are going to expand with Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Things like Grenada, Nicaragua. We're going to combat communism with varied success. Most of those places we're going to try to influence with the CIA. We're going to try to overthrow communist regimes, and we're going to have more success than we had before. With Vietnam, with Korea. Panama is going to be a big one, right? So One of Ronald Reagan's things, and he's kind of the reason why we have this war on drugs, right? Marijuana, for example, the harshness against that, a lot of it came from the Reagan administration to really amp up the penalties for having or selling marijuana. So trying to cut down on that, trying to cut down on cocaine, stop trafficking, really be harsh on people that use it, people that buy it, people that sell it. And one of the problems with this was that there was drug trafficking happening. And one of the countries that was trafficking drugs into America was one of our allies, was Panama. And their leader, General Manuel Antonio Noriega, actually was an ally. And basically had to make a decision when George H.W. Bush took over. Do we let this keep happening? He's basically importing cocaine into America, or do we stop it? And so we're going to send 20,000 soldiers to overthrow, the small country, this very small military, and we would just crush it. We actually arrest him. He's taken to the United States, and he's jailed. Now, a lot of the world did not like this. This was imperialism. America was taking a leader of a foreign country, arresting them and throwing him into prison, and he ended up going through a number of courts. He ended up serving some prison time in America, going over to Europe as well, and serving prison time and going back to Panama and being held on trial again. So, it ended up being, being what we wanted. Kind of the big piece, the main event of this section is the Persian Gulf War. So here's an example. We've seen a couple times in this course of America putting themselves in a bad situation. The CIA in 1963, Russia was invading the country of Iraq. And they basically the goal was to turn Iraq communist. And so we want to stop it. So the CIA is going to get involved secretly. We're going to get a band of kind of high-profile Iraqi men and have them lead kind of a anti-communist fight. And the leader of this group, his name was Saddam Hussein. He was the son of a political family in Iraq, and he was kind of the guy that we put in charge. We said, all right, this is the guy people are going to follow. They did. They won. It was successful. Communism out of Iraq. 1963, this is great. Cold War, winning it. Now, fast forward to a little bit later, and we see Iraq actually invade Iran. So I think sometimes in America, especially today, we think of the Middle East as this big thing, and Iraq and Iran, they're all the same. Those two countries have fought with each other for a long time. And the reason for this, Saddam Hussein, now the leader of Iraq, invades Iran, and there's a border dispute. It actually still continues in some aspects over where each country begins and ends. And the other piece, if you read last week about the Iranian Revolution, Iran became very fundamentalist after revolution, held Americans hostage. There was a fear that could come to Iraq, and Saddam Hussein didn't want to lose that power. He was a very kind of liberal, non-religious leader, and Iran now has an Ayatollah, a religious leader leading their country. And there are a lot of people in Iraq, a lot of Muslims that wanted that in Iraq. So he's going to fight Iran. He's going to keep them out and maybe even take their land and all of that. So, it doesn't really matter who won or lost. Iraq kind of had a victory, but really things stayed generally the same after this Iraq-Iran war. But there's going to be a lot of war debts. War is expensive. Saddam Hussein's got to pay back that money that he borrowed. And how's he going to pay it back? How's he going to get that money? He's taken a lot from his people already. But there's a very tiny country right next to Iraq called Kuwait. And Kuwait, very small, but they have a lot of oil because they're right on the Persian Gulf. So Saddam Hussein gets this idea. What if we invade Kuwait? They don't have much of a military. We can just take them. We'll take all the oil. We'll sell the oil. War debt's paid. We got money. Everyone's good, right? So Iraq invades Kuwait. They're actually thinking of invading Saudi Arabia as well, which is a much bigger country, but also has a lot of oil. That didn't happen. Now, the question with this is Kuwait is a country fairly harmless that is in the United Nations that, just got invaded. They got taken over. And who's there to defend them? This is where the United Nations comes in. So President Bush, George H.W. Bush, he is going to kind of take the point, gets the UN to commit to stopping Saddam Hussein, getting him out of Kuwait. And he's going to launch Operation Desert Storm, is we call this either the Persian Gulf War or Desert Storm is the operation for the United States and the UN. Our goal, free Kuwait from Iraqi control. That's the goal. Get them out. So, we're going to launch heavy attacks, mostly American soldiers, some other UN soldiers as well. And air attacks, we're going to bomb Iraq. We're going to bomb some areas of Kuwait that we know the Iraqis have taken and are in presence. And we're going to put troops on the ground. And we have massive success at this. We even bomb the capital of Iraq. We bomb Baghdad and have success. The general in charge, his name was Norman Schwarzkopf. Stormin' Norman was his nickname. Very outspoken, very charismatic. Military general's not always that way. But he would hold media press conferences and talk to them. And, very successful. He almost became more popular than George H.W. Bush, who was kind of leading the whole thing. And there are a lot of people for Bush's reelection. I kind of wanted Norman Schwarzkopf to be the president, not George H.W. Bush. So this is Schwarzkopf was really, really good at what he did. Saddam Hussein did not have a military background. He was, like I said, the son of a politician. And so Schwarzkopf used some of the simplest tricks in the book that he talked about after the war. Like we would, amass troops in one area to try to convince Saddam Hussein we're going to attack that. And he fell for it and threw all his resources into stopping us there, and we would attack somewhere else, and he'd have no idea. And so we would just win. These decoy attacks were fakes. So it was actually very simple. It lasted, didn't last long at all, just over a month. We liberated Kuwait. And then once you push an enemy out, now we're in Iraq. Now George H.W. Bush has a question, a big question. Do you get rid of Saddam Hussein, or do you let him stay as the leader of Iraq, right? He's committed these war crimes, these atrocities against the Kuwaiti people. Do we get rid of him? And ultimately he decides, let him go. We sign a ceasefire, basically says, Saddam Hussein, you cannot attack another country. Whatever you do in Iraq, you can do. But outside of Iraq, you attack another country, the UN's going to declare war. We're going to come in. We're going to take you out, and you'll be put on trial. So you break this ceasefire agreement. So Saddam Hussein now stuck, locked in Iraq, and he's going to turn his attention to another group, a minority group called the Kurds, or the Kurdish people. And they are basically kind of a minority religion, ethnic group that Saddam Hussein wanted to get rid of. He essentially wanted to commit a genocide and kill all Kurdish people in his country. So he starts doing it, right? Hey, our ceasefire agreement, he can do whatever he wants within his country. So he can kill all these people. And he does. And the Kurds reach out to America for help. And we kind of throw our hands up and say, hey, we made this agreement that he could do this. And so over 200,000 people are killed by Saddam Hussein just for being a certain ethnic group, which is genocide. So that's kind of where we end. The interesting part with this, looking to the future, is George H.W. Bush leaves Saddam Hussein in power. If we look forward 2 presidents to his son, George W. Bush, George W. Bush is going to invade Iraq in the Iraq War and will be forced to eliminate Saddam Hussein and arrest him. So basically, Papa Bush makes some problems for his son later. But this was a rousing success. Look, it took just over a month. There were 489 coalition deaths, the UN deaths. 294 of those were American. Of those 294, half of them were accidents. So the enemy really didn't kill many Americans at all. We crushed this. The ceasefire, kept him in power. Some people criticized Bush for that. So we'll find out, maybe rightfully so. And, Hussein's going to kill any opposition to him within his country. So, that's Desert Storm. You would think that this would lead to a re-election for George H.W. Bush. We'll talk next chapter. It does not. He's going to lose, because of some of the domestic issues that happen. So there you go. There's the lecture for today. You don't have to take these notes. You don't have to write them down and show me, but you can if you have them, or you can just listen to this. And make sure you do the Google form this week. Make sure you do the guided reading, and I'll see you next week.